Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's 10 o'clock on the dot, so maybe we'll give a couple seconds, not minutes, Gina, is that that's the instruction? But we're really excited to have everybody here today. And I'm gonna wait for Gina's eyebrows to tell me when to start.
If you feel it's time.
Are people showing up? Is there anybody here?
We have 14, 15. It's like going up really quickly. So
great. We'll give another 30 seconds. I've been instructed not to be awkward in the beginning of this, but I don't think I can help it.
Not to be awkward, but Gina, could you change your name to Gina real quick?
Oh, thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
And also, can you see my screen?
Yes,
we can. So, all right, once we see Gina's, I'm just going to jump right in, respecting everybody's Saturday morning. Okay, let's get started. Yes, Gina? Okay. So a warm welcome to the fourth webinar in our series of 5 about embryo donation. Today, we're going to talk about becoming a parent via embryo donation and the various elements a recipient may experience as they move towards or move through building a family through embryo donation in both known and unknown arrangements. So I am Maya. In 2014, here's my collage. In 2014, I was a recipient of a donated embryo. Now I'm the mother of an almost 6-year-old girl, which is super hard to believe. In 2010, when I started on my journey to parenthood, I was a very different person. I had specific expectations of what baby making was going to look like. And it wasn't 4+ years of fertility treatments that included surgeries, inseminations, IVF, and IVF with my sister as an egg donor, and then finally embryo donation. My expectation was that it was going to be a lot easier, maybe just a little sexier, and much cheaper and faster than how our story unfolded. And in 2010, when I started trying to conceive, if someone would have told me the end result would be a beautiful, strong, healthy, sassy as anything little girl via embryo donation, I probably would have said, what's embryo donation? Or maybe what the F is embryo donation? It kind of depends on where I was at. My husband and I documented our journey, and we produced a film called One More Shot that came out in 2018 on Netflix and is now available on Vimeo on demand. And I'm going to share a few moments from that movie later in the presentation. I'm also a psychotherapist, and I primarily work with fertility patients and those creating a family in alternative ways. And today I'm going to share my personal experience as well as my professional perspective from what I've learned working with people who are embracing donor conception and specifically embryo donation.
I'm Gina. I'm a genetic counselor in the field of reproductive medicine. I help people understand the meaning of genetic testing options and test results, or make sense of the genetics when working with an egg, sperm, or embryo donor. I had been working in the field of infertility for 6 years before trying to start my own family and realizing it would be a more difficult experience than I had hoped. My husband and I went through our own fertility journey for 3.5 years, finally conceiving our son via IVF. Somehow we actually got pregnant naturally when he was about 2 and lost the baby at 13 weeks. Eager to have another baby, we transferred another of our embryos a year later, and despite a very touch and go early pregnancy, our daughter was born. I felt pretty certain our family was done right away, but we held off on making any final decisions about our embryos until our daughter was about 2. In the meantime, speaking to fertility patients every day, there only seemed to be one option for us when it came to our remaining embryos. We knew there would be amazing parents out there for them somewhere. And we ended up donating half of the remaining embryos to a family member. They now have an adorable 2-year-old little girl. And our second recipients, people we met via a Facebook group, are still in the midst of transfers, and I'm sending lots of baby dust their way. I'll speak today mostly from my genetic counselor lens, and I'll be zooming into some of the intricacies involved in decision-making about a donor cycle, and later about relationship building in known embryo donation. The bottom left picture in this series is me with my recipient, Brooke, who you will get to see on video a little later in this webinar. Despite her being one of the most important people in my life, I have only one picture with her, and we need to remedy that soon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I'm a nationally certified counselor, and I have my own fertility story that led me to becoming an embryo donor. After 7 years, 2 cycles of IVF, one which ended in miscarriage, and the birth of my twins, I had just one frozen embryo remaining. I chose to donate to a recipient in a known arrangement. She's a single mom by choice living in New York City, which happens to be across the country from me. That embryo is now a 4-year-old boy who's thriving with his mom. You can see some pictures of us there. First it's me, then me and my twins, me and my donated embryo, all of us. And then at the end, you can see me, the twins, and my recipient's son. I'll share more about my relationship with my recipient later. Overall, I'll have a little bit of a less of a role in this webinar because I've spent my career in this field mostly working with donors, not recipients. That said, at the end, I'll present a section because I want to take a bit of time to tell you what I've learned about donors from my embryo donation support groups. I think this knowledge will be helpful for recipients and prospective recipients. One of my favorite things about Empower is how 2 of us are donors and 1 is a recipient. That fact has allowed us to grow so much by learning about one another's experiences. Meeting Maya and other recipients in the community has completely opened my mind. I'm so thankful that I can now better see the donation process through the lens of the recipients. So going on to our team, here we are, or at least there our fabulous Empower shoes are. The 3 of us are co-founders of Empower, and we're really dedicated to providing education and support for those interested in embryo donation on all sides of the equation. As you just heard in our intros, the thing that makes us really unique is that we're all professionally connected, but we're also personally connected. Before we dive into the content today, I just have a few housekeeping notes. First, I want to let you know that we've done 3 other webinars before this. You can find those on our website, which is empowerdonation.com/webinars. Second, we have our next webinar on April 10th. That is going to cover the experience of embryo donors and specifically the experience of having frozen embryos, whether or not you choose to donate. As for today's webinar, it'll be about 90 minutes. We'll save time at the end for questions. So if you have them, please type them into the chat. And remember, only we can see your questions and comments because we're recording this and we want to protect your privacy. So let's delve in.
We have a lot of exciting things we're getting ready to launch right now. We have an education platform coming soon dedicated solely to embryo donation called Moxie Education, as well as an open matching platform for donors and recipients called Moxie Matching. Another webinar coming up, support groups, funded genetic counseling for embryo donor matches, a podcast, and a lot more content and events around embryo donation. So if you'd like more information on any of those things, please go to our website and sign up to stay connected.
Okay, so how did we get here? People come to embryo donation for different reasons, and people can obviously have very different experiences and feelings about embracing embryo donation as their family building choice. My personal experience is that of a recipient who moved through various other fertility treatments before feeling that embryo donation was the best option I had to create a family. Other people may come from the perspective of wanting to avoid genetic disorders or have genetic equity between partners. And some people may be coming to embryo donation as a single person, perhaps a single mama by choice. Some people may have had a lot of past trauma and loss, while others may be moving straight to embryo donation as a first choice for their own personal reasons. Today, we're going to try and explore various perspectives of the recipient experience, but we know it would be impossible to cover every possible scenario. I'm going to make somewhat of an assumption that many people who are building a family through embryo donation are doing so after attempting other fertility treatments or having other initial expectations about their family building. I want to highlight that when I share about myself, it's just one perspective, and that's my personal disclaimer. I'm in an unknown arrangement because we did embryo donation through a clinic that had what was considered at the time to be an anonymous embryo donation program. And I put that in quotes because we know that anonymity really doesn't exist anymore. So that said, though, I have really one specific experience of what it was like going through it and what it's like now being on the other side of that kind of an arrangement. Jen and Gina both have known recipients, and they've navigated and continue to navigate this unique relationship. Through my work as a therapist and our work together at Empower, we've learned about many different thoughts and feelings from people in known donation arrangements, and we'll share some insights today as well. So I'm going to spend the next few slides. You have to move away because I can't look at myself in that shot anymore. I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about emotional elements recipients may experience and about processing the journey that led to embryo donation, that infamous journey. In my work as a therapist, I often talk about this gap between expectation and reality that many people find themselves in. Floating, sometimes drowning in this space between is a common experience when baby making doesn't go according to plan. So many of us who struggle to conceive or who didn't connect with a partner during those prime reproductive years are tasked with confronting and sometimes grieving elements of expectation when it isn't matching up with the reality of one's situation. This can be a process for some people to really fully understand what the expectation, the plan, the hope, the dream was, and then work to accept and embrace the reality. For me, being diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve in my early 30s threw a massive wrench in my 2 children before 35 plan. And as a fairly high strung, I use the word fairly lightly because I think my partners would disagree, but as a fairly high strung type A person, my diagnosis and the outcome of the various medical interventions I had tried were really not sitting well for me until I started working on revising my own narrative. Letting go of the shoulds and starting to shift my own perspective away from the script that I'd written for myself about what my family was going to look like and when and how it would all happen allowed me more space to accept the reality of the situation we were in. And that allowed me to open my heart and my mind to how our family would come together. It required a lot of expanding away from expectations and inviting more curiosity and a lot more patience. Learning to let go of expectations and embrace ways to make the best decisions I could in my own reality served me well to move through the experience with less struggle. But I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just highlighting that we're often so attached to how we want something to play out that we just can't envision any other way. Once we give some time and space to come to terms with expectations, we come to terms with the expectations that we have, and then also the reality that we're in, we're usually more equipped to move forward. I don't want to assume that this is always a struggle for people. Most people whose reality and expectations don't match up need a hot minute to adjust, but some people may embrace the new normal or new reality very easily, while others might not. And I think being aware of yourself and your feelings and finding the support you might need is really important to think about. For people considering embryo donation, there's often a past history of difficult life events and reproductive trauma that can be important to work through. Many recipients come to embryo donation after other things haven't worked. I think it's safe to say that for many recipients, there's been a history of loss and heartbreak that doesn't just disappear because you decide on embryo donation. It's so important to be able to process traumatic experiences and then leave space to grieve as you build a coherent understanding of the impact of what may have led you to embryo donation so that you can really make sense of things. I believe one important task in this process is learning how to hold space for a lot of different feelings. It's normal and it's okay to be feeling opposing things at the same time. So many people I work with are in this interesting place of feeling like, for example, both devastated, say coming off their last embryo transfer that didn't take, but are also grateful and optimistic about embryo donation. It may be confusing to have these differing feelings or to ping pong between feelings, but it happens often. And I think part of the learning is building awareness and allowing space for emotional experiences. Sometimes I work with people who feel guilty about still feeling a sense of grief around genetic loss while also moving forward with embryo donation. And I want to normalize these emotions and remind people that feelings do change over time. Of course, I'm also a big proponent of finding a good therapist with experience in reproductive medicine and alternative family building to support you when things like this come up. One last concept I often talk about when working with people moving towards donor conception or embryo donation is this idea of having 3 doors in front of you when you're first exploring different alternative family building options. I've pulled a few clips from the film I made with my husband to illustrate what moving through these doors can look like. The first door has a sign on it that says, "What?" or "How can this be happening?" or "This option is just too weird," or whatever initial confused or resistant feeling may come up. When you first start exploring donor conception, many people feel uncomfortable or upset or just unable to even consider the option in front of them. I'm going to show two short clips back to back here. The first is actually after a surgery I had, but I knew at the time about my diagnosis of diminished ovarian reserves and that my chances with IVF with my own eggs was really slim. It highlights the sadness and confusion I think many people can relate to. And then the second clip takes place in the doctor's office after our IVF cycle resulted in no embryos. Some of us call this the WTF appointment. It was the first time donor conception was really discussed, and clearly I am not happy about it.
I don't know, sometimes I think like maybe I'm not supposed to be a mom. Maybe it's not working for a reason.
I've never met anybody that wants to be a mom and have a baby more than you. It may not be comfortable, it's going to cost a lot, and could take a while longer, but if that's our chance, then that's our chance.
Sorry, I'm broken.
If you're broken, we're broken.
We decide we want to proceed with another cycle. We have to have faith that it will be okay. That will be the extent of it. Have I had the situation where it improved? Yes. Now let us decide that we cannot rely on that because we have limited resources of emotion, time, finances, and we're like going for a more sure thing. As hard as it is for someone who is young to make this decision, is there the alternative? And the alternative that we discussed on the phone was to use someone else's eggs.
I didn't realize we were really gonna sort of shut the door on me today.
I don't know, sometimes I think like
We have to figure out our text sometimes a little bit, but you know, in retrospect and knowing myself, I can see that the thought of donor conception was really upsetting. You know, we know our own faces. I was angry. I hadn't wrapped my head around it. I was scared. I was also exactly where I was supposed to be emotionally at that particular place and time, however painful it may have been. Then over time, I moved onto the second door. Door number 2 has a sign that says something like curious or need more info, or maybe this could be okay. It's sort of a softening of that initial reaction that you have in door number 1. And this middle space is the beginning of opening yourself to new ideas about family building and digging deeper into understanding what it might look like and how it feels. This door is about information gathering and learning about options and confronting fears and assumptions. I again have 2 clips to share to illustrate door number 2, though maybe the first clip is door number 2, which is when we decided to pursue embryo donation. And the one after is like door number 2.5. It takes place a few days after the frozen embryo transfer of the donated embryo that resulted in my daughter.
When the last embryo transfer didn't work, we said, all right, we're gonna try naturally for 6 more months because mentally and emotionally, I think we needed that closure. And then I got my period. You have to grieve the loss of certain things and decide what you want to do, how you want to live your life, how you want to spend your money, and what's the most important thing. We came to the decision that the most important thing is that we have a child, and secondly is that I have the opportunity to carry. And so with those 2 pieces, the embryo adoption made the most sense to us. So much of this is waiting. I love this embryo. I'm curious about it, and I just want it to stick and work and be our baby. Because I think, you know, after interviewing all these different people that have had to build a family in different ways, it really is just about being a family, you know?
Before I go on to share what's behind door number 3, I want to quickly say something about the word adoption here, which I said sort of in the middle part of this. We at Empower know that many people connect to the term embryo adoption, but we'll talk about the overall process for both donors and recipients as embryo donation, because that's actually the correct legal and medical terminology. And I just didn't know that when we made this film. But having gone through the process, it really wasn't an adoption. And I don't conceptualize my daughter as adopted. I'm more aware of the language now than I was then. So I just thought I would share that little tidbit. Now we can move on to door number 3. The sign hanging on door number 3 says something to the extent of, let's do this, something that signals moving forward feels right. It's very common to jump around a bit between these doors for a while, but when you finally land on door number 3, you want to make sure you've educated yourself and processed all your feelings and are aligned with your partner if there is one, so that you can confidently proceed. This last clip it sort of takes place over time a bit, but really it's after I've given birth to my daughter and I'm reflecting a bit on the process.
We both have never felt this kind of love for anything. Every morning that we wake up to her, I don't think either of us thinks ever about the genetics or where she came from. I love you. Infertility will always be a part of our lives and who we are. Are you eating me?
You eating mommy?
We're on a new journey now.
And there we are. Man, somehow every time it's like, it makes me teary, you know. This is such a process for people. And I think Gina and I have been working on this webinar and emotional, and it comes back, you know, and moving through these doors isn't linear. It's not like you're actually opening a door and going to the next stage, you know. It's such a process, and it's such a beautiful and amazing process. And my daughter's turning 6 in a week, and I don't know, it boggles my mind. But anyway, this film is kind of my trauma narrative in a lot of ways. But now that I have the space to look back and reflect, I can clearly see the emotional experience and the evolution of a person working through letting go of my initial expectations, feeling all the intense feelings, both the good ones and the really painful ones, then learning to open my heart to how our family would come together, and then feeling so much gratitude and not being able to see it any other way. Now, I personally just feel so grateful to the donors and even to the journey that led to my daughter, that led to my daughter, but really led my daughter and I to each other. It was a nightmare to live through, I'm not gonna lie. And it's a nightmare for a lot of people. But you know, when I think that the donors could have checked a different box on a disposition form in a clinic and my daughter wouldn't exist, it literally makes me tear up. But my experience as a fertility patient and as a recipient of a donated embryo makes me just so appreciative of the family that I have.
Maya just talked a lot about the emotional elements of exploring options in that second door. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. Many times when people are considering the option of embryo donation, they're also weighing other options. We're going to talk a bit more about getting comfortable with the genetics of other people. But first, I'm going to talk more in depth about different factors that play into whether embryo donation might be right for you, and thinking about the contrast between embryo donation and other gamete donation options, like egg donation, sperm donation, or sometimes double donor, egg and sperm donation at the same time to create embryos. Like most things in life, when you're making a decision about working with an egg, sperm, or embryo donor, you have to consider what's out there, make trade-offs and priorities, and consider how your values fit into the equation. Sorry, where were we? Oh, okay. Let's dive into what some of those factors are. If we think of a whiteboard and have to make some rational sense of all this, this is how I would break it up. Each of these issues might carry a different value for you, and you'll need to arrange your whiteboard in order of importance, looking at your own values and the availability of those options for you. So let's just pick an issue and move in. Sometimes it feels like the infertility experience is a long string of really difficult math problems where someone is changing up the variables or the equations. You're constantly learning new pieces that might affect your calculation and steer your decision-making in a new direction. Embryo donation is usually not the first stop on someone's plans for family building, and you might come to this option at the very end of a long and hard road, which might mean you're looking for the next option that has the highest odds of success. As a genetic counselor, I get asked this question a lot. Are the odds higher or lower with embryo donation? Well, it depends. Embryos are typically donated from people who have had their own success with IVF. Not always, but most times. And so they could come from a proven set of embryos with a high implantation rate and good embryology report. They could even be PGTA tested, and there could be multiple embryos available. This scenario could be a really high chance of success. On the other hand, embryo donation could mean a single embryo available with a not so optimal embryology report from a patient who is a little older at retrieval. That might be a little lower chance of success, but it could also absolutely work. Some people who are considering embryo donation are also looking into either egg donation, sperm donation, or perhaps both. As I said before, donor-donor or double donor. With each of these options, there are many different factors that contribute to assessing the overall odds of success. Ultimately, there are donated embryos out there that run the gamut from extremely high odds of success to situations where there might be a less optimistic attempt at pregnancy. It's possible to look at an individual cycle and estimate the odds of success, and that's where your IVF doctor can be extremely helpful in contrasting those various options for you. Another factor that plays into whether embryo donation is going to be the best fit for you is availability. Embryos that feel like a good fit may not always be easily available. While embryo donors' backgrounds will vary, sometimes finding a specific combination of race, ancestry, or physical features is just not available among donated embryos. And in those cases, egg, sperm, or double donor might feel like a better choice, though it can be quite expensive. Sometimes recipients share with us feeling that they have to create their own embryos with sperm and egg donors because there's a lack of available embryos that will work for them, and time can feel of the essence. And there's truth in that. Sometimes it's a trade-off in priorities and having to let go of some things that at first blush felt very important to you. How people decide on what they're looking for in a gamete or embryo donor is very personal. Race and ethnicity, health, physical features, talents, or interests, these can be what many recipients look for at first glance. But sometimes recipients are more interested in connecting with a donor that feels like a good fit for a potential lifelong relationship. If a known relationship with either embryo donors or other gamete donors is an important factor for you, one thing to keep in mind is that gamete donors and embryo donors tend to differ from each other in their life stages. Most gamete donors are in their 20s, while most embryo donors are in their 30s or 40s or even older. Embryo donors often have children themselves and tend to know themselves better, and their relationship expectation may be more clear. Another consideration that may factor into egg, sperm versus embryo donation is the understanding that egg and sperm donors may have participated in multiple cycles, meaning a higher chance of a higher number of genetic siblings or half siblings or other relatives. Some embryo donors have also worked with an egg donor or sperm donor to create the embryos they're now donating. So keep in mind that that could affect the total of number of siblings. So keeping all this in mind, but being aware of how you, I'm sorry, I got a little lost there in my own notes, how you feel about potentially high numbers of genetic siblings. Embryos that were created from the egg and sperm of an intimate couple will likely have fewer genetic siblings. I think using your own criteria for donor selection, wherever those are, is perfect. Just being aware of them is the important thing. Okay, so people often ask me about the inheritance of various traits when they're considering working with a gamete or embryo donor. I'll hear questions about hair and eye color or whether abilities are genetic. Like if both donors are musical, will my child be musical? The short answer is no. We can't really predict the possibility with certainty, but the true answer is maybe. Shared interests or talents and features can be genetic, but most are not fully genetic or not genetic in a simple math kind of way. There's been a lot written about this topic, but I find myself struck by how little true or definitive wisdom we actually have. Some traits have a stronger genetic basis than others, but who we all are is really the combination of genetics and environment. It's really hard to untangle the relative contributions of nature versus nurture for complex traits, though also very fair to consider in donor selection. Another serious question that often arises about the differences between gamete and embryo donation is that of genetic risk. But first, it's important to realize that we're all human. None of us is perfect. And we all have a genetic risk for something, donors included. And there are always going to be differences in the genetic risk between different candidates. A genetic counselor can clarify these concepts for each individual family. There's no one answer, but there may seem to be a very different risk picture when looking at a set of donated embryos versus an online egg donor or sperm donor profile. And with my years of experience working with egg and embryo donors, I can tell you there's a reason for that. Embryo donors who are known tend to give much richer family history information than other gamete donors. Why? Well, one simple reason is that they're usually 10 plus years older than other gamete donors, meaning there's just more medical history to report. And they often are parents themselves and want to be forthcoming so they can set up a healthy relationship with their recipients. They're also not being compensated to donate, and so they just tend to be more transparent. And they might better appreciate how this information can be useful in a child's life. Of course, it was not fun to tell my recipients that our babies had all sorts of issues in the newborn period: colic, reflux, sleep issues, tongue tie, even a weird issue with my breast milk at one point. They were just not happy babies. They turned into happy kids, of course, but we spent their newborn periods in a constant state of anxiety over what was wrong and could we do something to help. But this is really helpful information to share with their genetic siblings in case the origin turns out to be genetic. And I have to laugh because our first recipients, again, this is my uncle and his wife, they'd been parents before. They confirmed that we might indeed just create difficult babies. So of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but with all the advances in medicine, this can be very useful information. But it can also look scary if you've only seen egg or sperm donor profiles, where the donors are a lot younger, they go through various health screenings, and might not be painting a complete picture for a lot of reasons. It might be more tempting to go with what appears to be a more blank slate, whether that's the reality or not. When this more elaborate information is available, a genetic counselor can be incredibly helpful to review what we do and don't know about the genetic risk picture and to see how that might impact a child's life. With embryo donation, because embryos are already made and frozen, there's the sense that it may feel like an easier process. The more challenging element may be finding a good match, but once found and once psychological consults and legal documents are done, planning for transfer is probably less complicated than other family building choices. The unfortunate reality that money does not grow on trees is one we all have to face in our lives. And sometimes fertility treatment boils down to real resource considerations. I hate to think about embryo donation as a cheap option, but in the world of fertility, it is one of the more affordable choices. Because it's illegal to buy or sell embryos, people can only donate altruistically. While different programs or matching services may have different fees, for the most part, embryo donation is generally the cost of the transfer, medications, and potential travel or shipping, legal and psych. And if there's a program or agency fee, that would be part of this as well. Okay, sense of agency. Stick with me here for a minute. Agency is the concept of having freedom to make your own choices. And this freedom may feel really important to recipients who often feel that they don't have many choices. For years, gamete donation was largely through unknown, called anonymous at the time, donations, where the recipient parents had the agency to make their own choices because it was simply a commercial transaction. Known donations are a bit more unusual in egg and sperm donation. But embryo donation has shifted this model a bit because a lot of the time embryo donors want to have some choice in this as well. What we hear among some recipients, is that the sense of waiting to be chosen can feel really imbalanced. But it's interesting to hear because to a lot of donors have the same feeling about the process. At Empower, we want to support a perspective shift around this. We want to help people see this process of being in a known embryo donation relationship as matching and connecting with each other rather than one person or couple choosing or being chosen. Maya's found actually in her own story that what felt like a greater sense of control earlier in a process where she was able to choose an anonymous embryo turned out to give her less agency on the back end. She doesn't have a consensual way to communicate with the donors, and that has over time given her a lot to reflect on. It's a big driver into why we're setting up our program for matching, to help people feel agency through the whole process and set themselves and their children up for a sense of agency into the future. What's unique about known embryo donation is that it tends to feel like both sides are coming to the table to achieve the same goal. The motivations of the donors are a bit different than with gamete donation. Many times the donors are quite excited to find a recipient that makes them feel good about their choice to donate. They see a wonderful life for their remaining embryos, and they tend to care about their embryos. For some, this may feel like a more equitable exchange where they can set more clear expectations for future contact, and there can be less mystery in thinking through what those meetings might be like in the future. But it can also possibly feel a bit more intrusive from the recipient side. And it makes sense that people could be concerned about boundaries. Finding a balance is really important. But it's important to know that contact options can vary, and just choosing embryo donation does not automatically mean contact will happen between the two parties. A lot of the more traditional clinic-based programs still operate in an unknown fashion. Okay, so when I talk to people about their fertility journeys, I find that a lot of people are really tangling with the idea of genetic connection and how much it means to them as they build their family. And it really varies a lot, and it can change as the journey plays out. I'm so grateful for Maya's willingness to explore this on camera and the embryo donation community that are now talking about this shift, because it can feel very isolating to people going through it. And there are just not a lot of models in our society for what this really feels like. It's a real loss for some people, and it takes grief work to figure out whether there's another path to parenthood when the old-fashioned way doesn't work. So you can check out our Instagram feed for a lot more of the commentary on that. We did get a lot of commentary that really spoke to the consideration for genetic connection or genetic equity. That said, couples who come into fertility treatment and are faced with a roadblock on one side of the equation sometimes ask themselves, would I rather have one partner that's genetically connected to our child, or would it feel better for neither of us to have that connection? The answer, of course, will differ for each couple. And that's okay. I don't think anyone really ever knows how they'll feel about these things until they have to face it themselves. But one thing that always strikes me as beautiful is when I get to see how much love and curiosity and wonder goes into falling in love with a child who's not genetically connected. It almost seems like an ideal of what parenting could look like without our ego and projection of our own experiences and genetic tendencies somehow getting in the way. And that's what I've seen by seeing Maya as a mom. Okay, so another factor that will sometimes drive decisions is what the child's narrative might be in the long run, and shaping the family origin story in a way that's both authentic and positive. Because we all want to set up our children for a successful life. Their origin story and the way they understand it is important. When choosing donors, many people just get a gut feeling and may feel connected to an embryo or a donor through the way they can tell their story to a child. If there are good connecting pieces, whether those are physical or trait-based or interest-based, it's all about telling the child's origin story in a meaningful and positive way for the family. Check out our last webinar on talking to kids about embryo donation for more on what this conversation can look like and ways to consider your children's needs in understanding this story. So, simple math, anyone? We all want this to be a simple math equation, but the reality is you have to make the best choice you can with what you have available while inviting some flexibility and staying true to yourself. This is what we do. We help people put all the ingredients they're hoping for into their thought process and then weigh things with what choices they actually have in front of them. Self-knowledge and figuring out how you weigh each of the factors will go a long way in streamlining your decision-making process.
So embracing non-genetic parenting. One important thing for recipients to think about is how you will embrace the genetics of other people into your family building. How will you make sense and meaning of that? How do you feel about letting go of your own genetic material? And how might genetics be important to your child, and how will you support that? What are the implications of giving birth to or working with a surrogate to give birth to and then raising a non-genetic child? And how might different relationships with the donor family play out in a known donation arrangement? How does everyone conceptualize this unique family building choice? There are a lot of ways to think about these things and a lot of different questions to ask yourself when it comes to non-genetic parenting. You may have super simple answers or more complex ones. You may have some fears or concerns or none at all. The important part is to explore these thoughts and feelings with yourself, your partner if there is one, your extended family and friend circle if that's supportive, and if needed, your therapist. Because if you're moving forward with embryo donation, it is important to feel comfortable with someone else's genetics. The concept of genetic loss is often very prevalent for people, and Gina touched on this. Having to let go of one's genetics in order to have a child is a very specific thing. I often hear people who are early in the process say things about feeling worried that the child won't feel like their own child, or there are assumptions that because there's a lack of genetic connection, there will therefore be a lack of emotional connection, or that because the child doesn't share genetics, that they won't look or be like the parent. When I work with people who are feeling some of these things, I remind them that any child you love and raise is your child. It doesn't matter if that kid came from the moon, you're the parent. I remind people that lack of genetic connection does not mean a lack of emotional connection, and that even with our own genetics, you honestly never know what a child is going to inherit. Many of us assume making a child means that only the very best qualities of each partner is going to get smashed together to make the quintessential perfect child. But guess what? That isn't the case, and it shouldn't be. As parents, we're here to parent, not to create mini-me's. We can absolutely feel the sense of genetic loss with a feeling of gratitude for what we can gain from embryo donation. And then we have to open everything up to remember this is less about us and more about supporting and loving and nurturing the child that comes to us. I did a mini interview with my husband about this topic, and we'll share a little clip of his perspective. We really wanted to include some male perspectives as well. His is just one. So we can take a look at that.
When I really boiled it down to, like, I'm not going to be able to have certain parts of me or certain, genetic components like passed on to my child, I realized that I was making it about me and not about this baby. And so I looked at that, and it was my ego. And it's natural, and people feel that way all the time, to pass on the best of themselves to somebody else. That's evolution. Like, that's how things happen. But for me, I just felt like it was ego. And if I pulled my ego aside, what do I want? I want a family. I want a healthy child, and I want to raise this healthy child in an environment that I think will help them. And that didn't require anybody to have ears like mine or to have flat feet like mine or anything like that. It was just how could I nurture this kid? And the genetic components, when I looked at it that way, honestly just didn't matter the same way. Didn't matter anymore.
I should add, though, that I talked to him for a little while, so this is just we're just pulling these short clips to illustrate or highlight certain things, but it didn't happen overnight. It's we filmed our journey for 3 or 4 plus years, and it really, this particular moving to this last stop in a way of embryo donation, it did require him to process and think about it. So, we're kind of on the other side now talking about it, but I just want to really highlight that it's not simple necessarily. So anyways, Gina, we'll continue on. Nature versus nurture, girl.
And that's a question. That is intentionally with a question mark right there. Sometimes people assume that if they have a non-genetic child, that their child won't be like them. And I think that's a really big misconception about the way genetics works. Of course, there are things that are hard-coded in the DNA. Think about it like a computer. We all use this technology, and we might even buy the same model. Now, in the real world, the only way to buy the same DNA model is to have an identical twin. But I digress. There are some things that are simply hard-coded in there. But we all use our computers very differently. It really depends on what software you add and how you use the dang thing. My son and I both have PCs, but we use them totally differently. We don't much enjoy using each other's computers, though we like to visit and see what the other's up to. We're just different people. He still uses the same operating system, and he does have some of the same hardwired coding that I do that makes the thing run, but he added totally different software. It has to do more with the environment he's living in and being raised in. The important thing is that our environment influences how our DNA is read, and that changes who we will be. The nature versus nurture debate will continue on. Seriously, we're human, and nobody will ever tire of trying to figure it all out. But it's complicated. Environment and genetics work together. More specifically, you might have heard a lot about epigenetics and the maternal environment. So if you carry your baby who comes from a donor embryo, will you influence the way the genes are expressed? Absolutely, you will. And will it amount to much? Will your child's hair be a different, slightly different color than it might have been? Honestly, I have no freaking idea, and people want that information from us. There are no scientific studies that can really answer those kinds of questions. But also, here's the important thing. Epigenetics never ends. It has to do with how the genes are expressed, not in the way that they are modified by the environment. So the things you expose your child to, the household you raise your child in, will affect the way the genes are expressed. And you'll have a different kid in front of you than that kid would have been if they'd been raised in a different home. It's mind-boggling. And as Maya can tell you, your kid that is not genetically related to you can look and act an awful lot like you. Here's a few pictures of Maya's husband, Noah, with their daughter to illustrate that not sharing genetics does not necessarily mean there won't be physical similarities. I mean, look at those two. There are two peas in a pod. I think if you decide to embark on a path of non-genetic parenting, it just means you get to see the world through a new lens and you get to embrace your child's individuality in a really unique and special way, assuming you do the work on the front end and can get there conceptually.
I have about 400 of those pictures of the two of them over the years. So relationship options. Our second webinar really explores this topic in depth. So I'm just going to touch on it here, but another experience many recipients face is that of deciding what kind of relationship they want with the embryo donor or donors. It's not always easy to find a good embryo donation match, and embryos are much less available than, say, egg or sperm from donors. So it's, so much of this is availability also, and that was sort of, in a way, the situation I was in, but, it's hard when you want to have choices and maybe those choices just aren't available. But, we are learning more from the donor conceived community about the value of knowing one's genetic origins and connections. So it's just important to keep in mind. Each person or couple has to really consider what feels right for them, what's best for their potential child, and what is available. Decision making is multifactorial, to say the least. If deciding to move forward with unknown embryo donation, it's important to think about what this may mean for you and your child in the future. It often means having to be comfortable with having a little less genetic information or family history information, and knowing that there may be some relational complexities to navigate down the road, say if a child becomes interested in searching for genetic relatives. It is possible for adults to prefer not to know each other, but to create a way to be in contact in the future if the children wish to be. This isn't always how it's done at clinics, but consumer DNA testing is really shifting the landscape right now, and the concept of anonymity really doesn't exist anymore. So consider that when you're exploring different possibilities in an unknown arrangement. For some recipients, not knowing the embryo donors can feel easier or less complicated. Some recipients might feel like they've had a lot of people involved in their family building already, and they prefer to attempt embryo transfer and hopefully pregnancy and parenthood with some distance from donors. It may take some recipients a bit of time to feel confident in their pregnancy or to establish themselves as parents. The decision may be based on availability and finding a good match that is unknown. And recipients may worry about what they might do on the back end if their child wants to have contact with genetic relatives. An unknown arrangement can make this more difficult, and it's common for parents to feel uneasy about it. I think it's just really important for people to understand the implications of their choice and to try to think about ways to manage their own feelings and support their child's needs into the future.
So I'm going to be talking a bit about known relationships. I'm not a recipient. And, how must it feel to be on the other side of a relationship with me? I can imagine what it's like, but I don't really know. So we asked my recipient to share some of her thoughts, and we'll share them in a few minutes. And you'll also hear from Jen later, who has a much different known arrangement than I do. What we sometimes hear from recipients when they're looking for a donor is that they are eager to know more, but also a little bit fearful. It's understandable that they may want to contain hope as much as they can in fear of getting hurt. And they might have trouble finding a way to be authentic while they feel like someone else is sizing them up for a fit. The funny thing is that sometimes donors feel the same way. There are no etiquette guides for these relationships, though we'll be putting out more resources for this, so stay tuned. But they can be very emotional relationships where you're bearing your souls to each other through this joint experience of raising genetic siblings. That's how it feels to me with my recipient anyway. It feels like having a new sister. We love each other and we love each other's kids, and we can laugh and cry and share cute pictures. Will it be like this with future recipients? I hope so, but I also want to respect boundaries and not feel like I'm hovering on the outside of their family. It's a delicate balance, and everyone has to navigate their own instincts and respond to the other side too. Some people would absolutely hate what we have, and it would feel intrusive. Some people would just prefer having a relationship with the donors at a distance. And it's possible the other side might not totally jive with your expectations and desires all the time. And will you have to say something when that happens? Maybe. For me, it's just a dance and one I'm willing to learn as we go along. So Maya chatted with my first recipient, Brooke, about her experience in a known donation, and we're going to share a few clips of that conversation in a moment. But before we dive in, let me set the scene for you a bit. You may recall that our first donation was within our family. She'll mention her husband, Joe, who is my uncle, and their decision to proceed with embryo donation with embryos from my husband, JP, and I.
And both Joe and I felt the same way. Like, your children are so amazing. Aren't you going to see another child and want that child? And are you going to be really sad? And I asked Gina that when we came up there and visited them, I asked her, that was the first time that we were talking about it face to face. Are you going to see the baby and want the baby? Because I feel like I would, to be honest. And so, she gave her side of that and she put us at ease. And my main thing with that wasn't that she was going to take the baby or anything, but was that she would be too sad to be close to us and that she would need more boundaries. And for me, that would be hard. I became pregnant with her. I couldn't believe it. Honestly, I couldn't believe all of it for a while that it happened. And we texted Gina right away. As soon as I got that positive on the pregnancy test, like 7 weeks in or something, we texted Gina and she sent me back a text right away, like so excited. And so the three of us knew first. And so it was just amazing. And yes, I would feel really bad if I had become pregnant and then lost the babies. So, and that was a fear of mine. What if I miscarry? What if we go through like 4 embryos? I would feel bad. So I was scared about that. And honestly, like you said, Gina's the least judgmental person ever. And she just wants to give them a chance at life. And she feels like what is meant to be will be. So that's only my fears. That wasn't on her side at all. And she made that completely clear. I think what has evolved over time is, us going back and forth, like, are you okay? Do you want us to send you pictures? Are we sending too many pictures? Are we making you sad? Do you want to visit? Do you not want to visit? Are you not visiting because it's hard for you? You have all of those like things. But for me, I just wanted to share, like, I feel like I have a sister who loves my baby in an extra special way and literally wanted to share every single thing with her. And I felt like, sometimes I would talk to Joe about it. Like, I don't want this to be hard for Gina. It's not hard for us. We want to share everything. We want everybody to love our baby as much as we love our baby. I want her to know them, and I want her to know that they love her. That part I worry a little bit about too. I really want her to feel like they love her so much. And so then I worry, will she understand everything that we did? I know it's not always there's going to be hard parts here and there. It's going to be impossible to get around that. So for me, the easiest solution, or the easiest way to deal with it, there is no solution, but the easiest way to deal with it is to have us all be as open as we can be with each other and our struggles, fears, wants, desires, everything, and for them to love her. That's what I really want. I want to have pictures of them holding her, because I really want her to feel like they love me just, so much that this is what they gave for me. I want her to feel so loved by me and by Gina and by JP. And both Joe and I felt.
I'm trying. Okay, go for it, Maya.
So I feel like Brooke and I are on opposite ends of the known unknown relationship spectrum. And I'm really grateful that she was willing to let me chat with her a little bit and to share that, because it's really different. It's a really different experience. I didn't have worry about that relationship in some ways, but I had my own set of fears, which I have written here. This is taken just a few days before I exploded. but given that I'm in an unknown relationship, it was just different. And it's interesting because I never worried that I wouldn't bond with my child or anything like that. I do hear that sometimes with people. I'm not sure why, but I just didn't have that particular experience. But I do remember feeling really anxious once when I was pregnant, and I was talking to Noah, and I said something, in tears, like, what if one day she says, "You're not my real mom"? And Noah looked at me and was like, she probably will, because teenagers say some stuff, some things. But, I know 100% that I'm her real mom. That is a truth. We don't share genetics. That's another truth. My fears are my own, and her feelings are going to be her own. And my job as her real mom is to navigate all of this with her. And if and when the time comes, this navigation includes the challenges that we may have connecting to genetic relatives. And I just think this shift, and almost like going back to the doors that shift things, it's just really about it. It's a process and being open to a lot of these things. So anyway, we could go on forever. I'm going to pass it to Jen.
Okay. Well, I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about the donor perspective. But the interesting thing is, it's not really all that much of switching gears, because as we've heard, there's just so many common feelings on both sides from embryos and recipients. So I'm going to talk about that. We know that this webinar is for recipients, but we also want to talk about the donor perspective. Specifically, what do donors want recipients to know? How can we work to increase communication and shared experiences between donors and recipients? As I mentioned in my intro, when I met Maya, I became incredibly thankful to learn more about the recipient perspective, because so much of the prior work I had done was solely with donors. Also, I happen to be our social media person, so I have the pleasure of gaining knowledge from the embryo donation community as a whole and the experiences of so many other recipients. We did this really cool thing last week on our Instagram page where we asked recipients to share their answer to the question, what helped you embrace building a family through embryo donation? We had some wonderful responses, and if you head over to our highlights, you can see them there. If you didn't get a chance to respond and want to, we would love to hear from you. Okay, so what I've learned by working with donor support groups. I've been running donor support groups for about 4 years. What I know after working with these groups of women is not only is it important to talk about their individual experiences of deciding whether or not to donate and choosing the relationship option they prefer, but it's also really important for them that recipients understand some of their process and some of what they've been through, and vice versa. We want to understand the other side. If I could sum up one of Empower's main goals, it would be to have education and understanding from both sides, which we believe leads to healthy dialogue and communication. So I'm hoping that a lot of donors and prospective donors are in our audience today, and a lot of recipients or potential recipients will attend our next webinar on the donor experience. With this increased knowledge of both perspectives, we believe the process of embryo donation can be a more seamless, peaceful process, and perhaps less anxiety-provoking for both sides. So again, the theme, what donors want recipients to know. I have probably taken over 100 pages of notes from my past support groups. And I also recently asked some past group members to respond to the question, what do you want recipients to know? I was curious about donors' hopes, fears, communication desires, feelings of gratitude, etc. Here's a summary of what my notes say and what their responses said. First, donors who choose a known, also called open or semi-open donation, often take a lot of time to get in touch with their feelings. Imagine the feelings of others, including the recipients and their children, of course, and then they choose a donation that feels right to them. This is not often a quick or impromptu decision. Donors may sit on storage bills for years before they decide the decision is the right time to donate. So the first takeaway is the decision to donate is often very carefully thought out. The second takeaway, donors often have a strong sense of wanting to help others who have had fertility struggles. For some, including myself, it was my way of giving back to someone I could relate to. In a way, it was about giving meaning to my pain, to all the time, money, and heartache I experienced to have my own children. I wanted to give back to somebody who may have experienced something similar. The third and fourth points are big ones. I've heard these over and over from donors. First, donors want you to know and feel that this is your pregnancy and your child. They don't want to take your place as a parent, and they want to make sure that you know that. Also, donors want you to be confident in your parenting. They don't want control over how the child is parented or raised, and they really hope that you understand that freedom. The next point, and because of all this, donors are often very careful because they don't want to seem too curious or too intrusive. They don't want to overstep boundaries. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a donor ask what would be the perfect gift when they hear that the recipient is pregnant or when a birth occurs. Donors want to get it just right, and they don't want to be too much and they don't want to be too little. And finally, donors are extremely grateful for their recipients. They are aware that an open relationship may not be easy for the recipients. They are aware that navigating everything that comes with this journey may be difficult. Here's just one quote from one of the donors I asked to give me feedback. And she said, "I am so grateful for my semi-open relationship with my recipient. I know it takes a lot of strength to be able to interact with the donor family, but it takes even more to be completely open to friends and family about where their babies came from. She is a rock star." So, moving on, I'm not going to talk too much about my relationship with my recipient today. But I wanted to just mention one particular day that came to mind when I was prepping for this webinar. I have so many stories I could tell, but I think this one encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about today. So you can see pictures here. As I mentioned in my intro, my recipient lives in New York City. I made a trip out there right before her son's first birthday because I wanted to see them in their environment. I had met him one other time when he was around 6 months old, but this is the second time I had met him. I was staying with a friend in Brooklyn, and I purposely insisted that I walk all the way from Brooklyn to Manhattan because I wanted this experience of like walking across a bridge and experiencing what felt like one of the most important days of my life. I got to meet up with my recipient. I got to go with her to her son's daycare. I got to see him interact with his peers. I got to meet his teachers. And I also just got to experience what a slice of life was like for them. After we picked him up from his daycare, we went to the New York City Public Library, where, as you can see in the picture there, I got to read to him. There was even this cool moment where his mom had to go to the bathroom and he had a little cold and I got to wipe his nose. And I just remember thinking, this is just such a unique experience that I'm finding myself in right now. The main reason I wanted to tell this story is because at the end of the day, when I was walking them to the subway to travel back to their home, my recipient took the time to ask me, "How are you feeling right now? How was today for you?" And I will just never forget how thankful I was that she was having those feelings, because of course I was wondering the same for her. How is this for me to be here, to experience your life? And so her checking in with me in that moment, although it sounds very simple, is something, again, I will never forget. when I was prepping for the webinar, I asked my recipient for her advice on how to navigate a known relationship. She actually gave me this really beautiful quote that I think I'm going to share in full at our next webinar. But for now, I just wanted to share one simple sentence. She said, quote, "Give donors space to have their own feelings and check in with them." Boom, simple, yet beautiful advice. And as I've just described, donors want the same thing for recipients. In the same way, they want to give space. And what I think sometimes can be more difficult is finding the ability to check in about our feelings, which brings me to the final slide of this webinar. So in conclusion, although we are going to have a Q&A in a moment, this is just what the embryo donation community has taught us about donors and recipients. Today, we've heard about Maya's experience, we've heard about Gina's experience, Gina's recipient's experience, my experience, and my recipient's experience. We know these examples don't encapsulate the experience of everyone listening to this, but we also know that we all, first of all, have a lot in common. So many of us have been through similar infertility struggles, and that fact can bond us. Also, second, there are fears and excitements on both sides, just as we've heard today. Third, we have the opportunity to dispel one another's fears through our commonalities. For example, recipients sometimes fear that they will disappoint donors if the embryo doesn't take and there isn't a pregnancy. Well, guess what? Donors have the same fear of disappointing recipients if there isn't a pregnancy with their donated embryos. Also, interestingly, both sides sometimes worry that their children will desire a life they weren't given. For example, I worry that my children will be envious of their genetic sibling who is being raised in New York City. And I know my recipient has the same fear that her child will want a different life. Finally, both sides are uncertain of how they will feel throughout the process of donation. Pregnancy, birth, talking with their children about genetic relatives, and so on. And that's okay. That leads me to the final two bullet points, which I bolded because I feel like they're really important. Transparency in this process is important, and communication is key. It's our hope that this webinar has given you the message that feelings are real, it isn't always easy, and we have the opportunity through education and support to make this a beautiful journey, beautiful family building option, and beautiful life path. Be comfortable with your choices. Be proud of your decisions. Be flexible with yourself. Stay grounded and seek support along the way. That's what brought us together to create Empower. That's why we're here, and that's our passion. So it is now time for some questions and answers. There are a few of you who asked questions along the way about whether or not this will be recorded. I hope I answered you both by saying yes, it will. And for those who had the same curiosity but didn't ask, we will send out a recording in a bit after this, and then eventually the recording will be on our website. So you can expect that today. There is a question about our database, which I'm assuming you mean Moxie Matching, which is our matching platform we are building for donors and recipients. And the question is, will our database be diverse? I'll start by saying we certainly hope so. That's a big goal of ours. I don't know if Gina or Maya, you want to add to that question, because it goes on to say finding AA donors and embryos is so hard.
Yeah, I think that person was saying that was African American donors, and okay, sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's our hope. We actually think that there's also a piece of it that I'm going to stop the share so you guys can see our faces possibly a little bit bigger. I think there's the hope that also with education and support, more donors who haven't been traditionally served, or people that would consider donating, who haven't really connected with what does this decision mean, like as we get more voices out there and people understand this decision and have some models for it and have some support along the way, that there might be a lot more embryo donors from all walks of life, from different diverse racial, ethnic, different kinds of attributes, like that it's not, we don't think it's completely just about where they come from and who they are, but also just how they think too. So that we're really hoping that our work and what we're bringing to this matching platform will help people to find more diversity out there, and people that can align with your values and can match well.
Yeah, and I think this question really does speak to the challenges with availability, and for a lot of different reasons. But we do hear this. I sort of felt it myself in some ways, looking for an embryo that had some Japanese specific, and I think a lot of races and ethnicities are something just lumped together in this kind of interesting way or challenging way. But yeah, it is really hard sometimes to find a good fit. And as we're building our platform, we're really aware of that. And we're really, really hoping that we can create a very inclusive environment for all different kinds of people. And that it really is about matching and connecting and things like that, and finding what feels like a good fit. So long answer to say yes, we are very, very much hoping so. So Jen, let's see, I'm looking at questions. This part is always where I feel kind of like, okay, wait a minute.
So the next one I wanted to respond to, I'll just read it and then I can respond.
May I interject really quickly just to say, if for one moment, we're going to get back to Q&A, but before I get there, if you happen to want to, leave a little early, I also wanted just to give a plug to our feedback. We'd love for you to fill out a survey. So if you, we will have this available online if you go to the webinars tab, or on YouTube, there will be a comment there. And then if you have registered for this webinar in advance, we'll send you an email directly with this link. So please give us your feedback. We're always trying to make sure that our content is addressing your needs and thoughts. And, so this is something that we every single comment we read and think about and try to integrate into what we're giving. So your feedback is very important. I'm just going to give a plug to that, and I'll get back to Q&A, Jen. Let you finish your say.
Thank you for doing that, Gina. I think we usually mention the survey at the beginning, and we didn't this time, so thank you. So I was just going to read this next question. It says, I have undergone one IVF cycle that failed before getting a chance to transfer. I have never been pregnant. I have had endometriosis that has been treated through medication and surgery, and I may have, I don't know that word, Gina.
Adenomyosis. I can't even say meiosis.
I said that I just assume Gina knows every medical word. That can only be truly diagnosed through hysterectomy, which could affect chances of implantation and pregnancy. So the main question is this something that could scare away donors from choosing us through a private match? And thank you. So I'll start by answering based on my experience working with donors. I think it depends on who the donor is. I personally know so many donors that just want to give and give back, and they are not going to only give to the person they feel will have the absolute best chance at pregnancy. For them, it's more just a really wanting to give this. And sometimes we don't use the word gift because that doesn't feel good to some people, but really just to give this opportunity of parenthood to recipients. And so something like in that case, that would not affect their decision. That said, there are some people who, really have a vision and a hope that the embryos turn into pregnancies and live births, and may be more picky or specific about who they want their embryos to go to. So that's my answer, and I'm sure Gina or Maya, you might have something additional to add or not.
I think you nailed it. Like, I feel like there's a lid for every pot in some ways. Like, people find there, and people come to this decision in such a variety of ways that Yeah, I think it just depends. And I think being honest and transparent about what that process might look like. It also might set somebody up who's had a really triggering fertility journey themselves that they are coming off of, and they're like, okay, I'm in a good place. And sometimes they don't want to experience that fertility experience again. And it's hard to watch somebody else go through it, so there might be some question of whether they can go through that and feel a part of it again. So there are going to be some people that might shy away from an experience where they think it's not as hopeful, and others that are like, let's do this. And I think it's just going to depend.
Yeah, I'm connecting a little bit more, I think, to the emotional experience of everything that this person has already gone through. And then this fear or this feeling of, will I be chosen again, that has come up, that Gina, I think, touched on a bit, during this presentation. And, and again, it's trying to conceptualize as a match, because, and some, like Gina was saying, some donors might feel a little hesitant to have to maybe go through this infertility journey again. On the flip side, some donor might have had a very similar journey, and then it worked for them, and they're feeling like, oh yeah, like this feels okay. So I think it's really about trying to about being honest, and being honest about your feelings, and also about the situation. And there's always medical clearance as well. If a doctor clears, does sort of a medical evaluation, and it doesn't seem like problematic or whatever, since there's an opportunity to be able to get pregnant, then it's just about finding the right fit in that situation. Hopefully that's helpful.
I think both of you, what you added is probably extremely helpful. So I'll just go to the next question. It's not really a question as much as it is a comment. But I'll read it in case it helps other people in the audience. It says, we have a semi-open relationship with our donor. We talk a lot online, but undetermined yet if we will ever meet, but open to it when the kids are older. I'm currently about halfway through my pregnancy. Our donor is also miraculously, spontaneously pregnant now also, which happens sometimes. And I'm worried about what our baby will think later on when she's older, about her genetic parents having kids after they donated her. I wonder if our donor has similar fears. So my comment to that would be, she very likely may have similar fears. And my encouragement would be that if it feels safe to you to ask that question, that can be okay. That's sort of like the opening up of the communication and sort of giving space for feelings. I work with a lot of people that do a lot of wondering of how other people feel. And again, there's this sort of like fear of being too intrusive by asking too much. But I am always a fan, again, as long as you feel that the relationship is a safe space to sort of share in at least, a gentle way of that you may have some similar fears. That would be my advice. And I don't know, again, do you guys have anything additional, different opinion or additional something to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting scenario, right? It's like so much of this is unanticipated or just like unexpected things that happen. And I think it's just grounding yourself also in confidence, like you're halfway through your pregnancy, and congratulations on that. And you're going to navigate all of this with your child. You've created this space for a connection into the future. And if you have wonders or fears or worries or something like that, finding a way to talk about those things, sometimes that's just it. There's so much dancing around, and I don't know how she feels, and I don't know, and all this stuff, that it's agonizing sometimes. And if there's a way to feel comfortable talking about it, that maybe those fears will be shared, and then maybe you can create a narrative together, or like an understanding together of how you want the children to understand it. And and it could be kind of a really beautiful thing, and it could be something that just separate in some ways also. So I think the and sort of anticipation anxiety around some of these unknowns, it makes a lot of sense and is understandable, but perhaps being able to talk about them might dispel some of those, and just really being comfortable and confident in where you're at in your own journey and pregnancy, and how that will shift, when your baby comes, and all of that. So just kind of thinking about all those things. Sorry if that was all over the place, but
No, I think it was good.
I think that was a beautiful answer. And I got to say that I had that experience as a donor. I thought that I got pregnant spontaneously after the donation happened, and my first recipient was already pregnant. And I remember this whole fear spiral I went into of like, what will this mean to their baby, and how will their baby feel if, and it's like, I wasn't pregnant. So it ended up being, for me, like that was kind of just this whole thing I got to experience what that fear meant. But I think I came around to it that, like, if that were the plan, like I'm comfortable enough in our relationship with ours, and I'm comfortable enough with our communication that we could find ways to talk to our children about how this experience shaped us in so many ways, and really be honoring our narrative no matter what. Like, it didn't change anything about the way that I felt about them. It didn't change that I wanted them to be pregnant with their baby. And it was like, I feel like we conceptualize this as the parents seeing this as like a dichotomous thing. Like, you choose this or you choose that. And I don't think it's that way to the kids when they see it years later. Maybe it is. I don't know. I think it's just like, we can't envision so far into the future of how so many life factors are going to affect their narrative. But what we can do is be honest and show up and be authentic to ourselves, and to be, really untangle our feelings, and, work on communication with our match. I think makes a huge difference if we have a known relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the next question is, how do you share with people outside of close friends and family about embryo donation, from the pregnancy announcement and through the child's life? How do you protect the child's story? I'm assuming this question is from the recipient perspective, although it could go both ways. But Maya, do you want to take that?
yeah, I can give it a shot. How do you share with people outside? So, it goes back to this concept, which we talked a bit about this in the last webinar, talking to kids about embryo donation, and that's on our website as well. But it's sort of about privacy and secrecy, and the difference between those things. And, every family feels different. I mean, clearly I'm, I share with people outside of close friends and family about our story. I'm open about it. I made a movie about it. I've made that choice for myself. That's not a choice for everybody. And I do think about, have I overexposed my child in some way? And this is, as a parent, this is what we have to grapple with a little bit. I think, coming to the table with a certain pride and confidence and openness about how our family comes together feels good to a lot of people. And the idea of anything that is secretive or, kind of feels shameful also. So, you don't have to go around telling your story to everyone. It's sort of gauging what feels right, and slowly exploring, what's the narrative for you, leaving space for how the child's going to conceptualize things as well. And, some people really feel like this is the child's story and they don't want to share, but then it's like a little tricky because we also don't want to hide secrets, and it could just be something that's very generalized, that our child came to us in a unique way. And, and it's like, you don't owe other people an explanation of how your family came together. But just, I think keeping in mind the difference between privacy and secrecy is important as you're really starting to shape and practice or consider who else to share with, and how and in what way you're going to share. So I don't know. I hope that's helpful. Does anybody have something to add to that?
I was just going to add that I think, assuming that this audience member hasn't seen the last webinar, I do think it's because we focus so much on how to talk with children about embryo donation from both sides. And one of the things we talk about in that too is sort of prepping the people in your close circle about, how, like, to kind of almost teach them too about how to, to talk with the child, so that it doesn't come as a huge shock, like you're making this announcement and you haven't had like some maybe previous conversations with people that are important in your life. And we know that that's not always available, that you won't always have this huge support circle, but in most cases, you'll definitely have friends, family, and close allies who you can kind of share this with in a very safe way. And then again, giving the child the freedom to know, to not make things secret, and then to kind of help them navigate that through. So
I could read the next one. What advice would you give to known recipients and donors who are speaking for the first time to see if they feel they are a match? And I kind of love this because we're getting ready to launch, in addition to Moxie Matching, this matching platform that we're working on, we're also launching an education platform. And there are several articles and things that we've written about this, how to date your donor or recipient, right? It's like, it is a totally new experience for a lot of people. And I think I have to let Jen and Gina answer this. But, in speaking for the first time, how do you, it's like, hey, here I am. Like, what do you recommend?
I think you accept the fact that it's going to be awkward at the very beginning. You have to accept the fact that, like, we don't have any models for this. Like, okay, like everybody's nervous about that first conversation. Everybody. I guess I can't speak for everybody. I think that's the general sense, that everybody's like, that a lot of people kind of come to it going, oh my gosh, what is this going to look like? And they ask that same question. So I think just allowing yourself space for that is really important. And I think that what we talk about in some of our tools is knowing yourself, knowing what you want, doing the work before you get to that point is really important, because it'll help you just to hone in on what is important to you. How can you hear what the other person is about and see if it's a match? So just being honest with yourself about what this is that you're looking for. And I think that just the time you're spending thinking here, being here, listening to this webinar is already that, like, you're already thinking through some of these issues.
Yeah. And maybe I'll add to it if I'm allowed to in this moment, but I think knowing what your deal breakers are, knowing what will work for you, knowing kind of what you're looking for ahead of time is important. And then understanding it might shift a little bit. You might meet somebody and go, oh, I thought that was really important, but now maybe it's not. It's this kind of mental flexibility that we're all going for here. And just really connecting to, how can I be as honest about myself as possible and honest with what I'm really looking for? And then know that there's some wiggle room, perhaps. I don't know if there are specific best questions. It sort of depends on how it all goes. As we're creating and envisioning our matching platform, we envision that people will make profiles and then have a component where they can just directly message each other and just say, hi, I looked at your profile and I'm really interested in X, Y, and Z about you, or I wanted to share some stuff about myself to see if we're a good match, right? Something that's sort of simple and introductory, but honest. And I think the idea of being honest, this is a lifelong connection for the most part. So really considering that as you're getting to know people, and there's no right or wrong, in a lot of ways. So it's just kind of being flexible with that. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I was basically going to say what you just said, Maya. My notes that I just jotted down were: know your deal breakers, be really transparent in the process. Don't tell each other things that aren't true about yourselves to try to force a good match. And I think in the end, it's a combination of knowing yourself, educating yourself, and then also there's some gut and intuition that goes into it too. And this is something we talk so much about. We have a whole week on it in my support groups. Is basically the decision, and how do I know who, and what's the vetting process, and what's the right thing, and when do we talk, and all this. And so it's just this really, I think, dance of intuition and knowledge. And again, though, can't say enough to really just be honest and transparent, and know yourself and your deal breakers, because in those cases, those are the cases that are going to be a more seamless process.
And can I add that it's normal to date multiple people. It's normal to, to message a few different people at the very beginning if you're connecting to potentially different people, because I think there's this idea that there's this little bit high pressure built up at the very beginning because people don't want to hurt each other. I think generally donors are very afraid to open something up if they're not, kind of more sure that there's a potential match there. People are not trying to drag each other through. I mean, I got to say, there's probably trolls out there in the world, and we're going to be, eyeing that kind of stuff to make sure that doesn't ever happen. But like, the reality is that most of the people that come to this experience and want to donate are not trying to hurt somebody. And so there's going to be an element of like, how do I just get in a conversation with somebody and just go through the bumps a little bit, and knowing that there's, that we're open to figuring this out. And so just knowing that it's okay, you might have a couple different conversations with different people to find the potential match for you, if a match is, if it's going to happen.
Yes. I feel like, Maya, the next, which is kind of the final question. I guess.
Yeah, and
my thought is to have you answer first. And the question is, any advice from someone who has done anonymous donation? Worry about when the child turns 18, ask questions that you can't give.
Yeah, I'll say children will probably ask questions before they turn 18. So be prepared for that. And again, that last webinar we did about talking to children speaks a lot about this. But yeah, in an unknown donation, there is worry about just not having answers to certain questions. And, I think what's most important is that as parents, we are okay with that we're okay sitting with our kid and sort of following their curiosity, really validating, that's a really interesting question. I wonder that sometimes too. And, I wonder how you feel about that. And just being able to make it just totally okay that your kid has questions, and to do the best you can with it. I think as parents we'll waver at times between how confident we feel about certain things and how, oh God, this is heartbreaking, I can't believe it, like that, this kind of just the difficulty in some of this stuff. But it's okay that you don't have all the answers, and it's okay that there are questions. And I think knowing and feeling confident in your decision making and being able to share part of that with your child, but then also kind of following them in whatever they might need. So I think the keys are to expect questions before age 18, and to validate them and really give space for them and make it feel totally safe and okay for them to ask the questions that they have. And then to join them in their curiosity about whatever questions that you can't answer. That connection is going to be really important, to be able to connect to your child, and agree that you wonder too, or you wonder what that feels like, or whatever it is, because we're not going to have all the answers to every question, and that's kind of true for everything, like in some ways. But I understand this is very specific, and and I have the same feelings sometimes. I don't know, my kid's going to be 6. I don't know what her questions might be, but I have shared a lot with her in an age appropriate way about her genetic connections and her donor helpers, and so she gets it. So I think planting the seed early, and this is a message or a takeaway from our last one, is early, helping your children understand the unique way they came into this world early. And they had donor helpers, or an embryo donors that help them come to be. And that it's a positive thing for everybody involved, so hopefully that's helpful. I don't know, anybody have things to add?
I think that was perfectly answered. And in addition, some of you have made nice comments to us in the chat, so just thank you for your support. We, as Gina said, we would love to get your feedback on the survey that will be emailed to you. Hopefully, well, I guess as soon as I get that out, which is probably hopefully in an hour.
And thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. We feel so passionate and excited about all of this, and we have just so much more to come, and want to create this space for people to talk openly. And we have sort of like recipient focus, and then the next one to be donor focus. But I think a lot of things moving forward are like, how do we just do this together? Because we're really trying to bridge this gap, and with always the best interest of the child in mind. And I think there are just so many different stakeholders and people who come to the table with different perspectives, and we want to just honor and welcome all of that. So thank you for being with us. There's our website.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Take care.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.